The village of Hallowmoor had long been cursed with eerie silence after dusk. Its residents spoke in hushed whispers about the Hollow Children, ghostly apparitions of children who once lived centuries ago before their innocence was twisted into something malevolent. It began one autumn evening when a couple, the Millers, moved into an old, abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of the village. The house stood on the edge of the Hollow Woods, a dense forest known for its unsettling quiet. Despite the villagers' warnings, the Millers shrugged off the superstitions, thinking the tales of the Hollow Children were merely ghost stories meant to scare newcomers. The first night in the farmhouse was peaceful, but strange occurrences began soon after. Sarah Miller, the wife, awoke to the soft sound of laughter drifting from outside. Looking out of the window, she saw faint silhouettes of children standing at the tree line, their figures barely visible in the mist. They were laughing and playing, but something felt wrong. Their movements were too quick, too fluid, as if they weren't bound by the same rules of time and space as the living. The next morning, Sarah told her husband, David, what she had seen. He laughed it off, attributing it to exhaustion. Yet the feeling of unease lingered. The following nights, the laughter grew louder, figures drawing closer to the house. One evening, David ventured into the woods, determined to uncover the source of the unsettling sounds. Armed with a lantern, he wandered deeper into the fog-shrouded trees until the air grew heavy with an oppressive cold. There, in a small clearing, he saw them. The children were pale, their clothes tattered and caked with dirt. Their eyes were hollow deep, endless voids of black. One of them, a girl with tangled hair, stood at the center of the group, staring directly at him. Her lips curled into a smile that was anything but innocent. Do you want to play with us? Her voice was high-pitched, almost mocking. David felt a chill run down his spine as the other children began to approach him, their movements unnervingly quick, darting between the trees like shadows. In a panic, he turned and fled, the sound of their eerie laughter echoing behind him. When he finally burst through the door of the farmhouse, Sarah was waiting, her face pale with fear. She had been watching from the window, and the children had nearly reached the house. The next morning, they tried to leave the village, but something stopped them. Every road seemed to twist and lead them back to the Hollow Woods. Their car refused to start, and even walking away proved futile. That night, Sarah woke up to find the house filled with whispers. The children's voices echoed through the halls, calling out to her and David by name. Come play with us, they said, their voices haunting and seductive. Then came the tapping. Small, rhythmic taps at the windows, as though tiny hands were trying to claw their way in. When David looked outside, he saw the children, their hollow eyes now glowing with a faint red light. They surrounded the house, their distorted forms twisting and shifting, growing more grotesque with each passing moment. The Hollow Children were no longer just ghostly apparitions, they had transformed into monstrous beings, their small bodies contorted and fused with dark, otherworldly forces. Their laughter turned to low, guttural growls, and their pleas for play became demands. The Millers were trapped, their minds unraveling as the nights bled into one another. The Hollow Children became bolder, now visible even during the day. The couple began to hear strange voices in their heads, whispers of dark secrets that the Hollow Children held, whispers of an ancient curse that had bound them to this place. Trapped in the bodies of innocent children, but twisted by an ancient evil. And then, one night, the whispers changed. Instead of calling them outside, the children's voices grew darker, speaking of a game that could end the torment. The rules, however, were unclear, and the consequences seemed far more sinister than anything they had encountered before. As the Millers stood at the window, staring out into the woods where the Hollow Children awaited their decision, they realized that the game had already begun. The question lingered. Would they be the next players to fall into the children's grasp? Or would they somehow uncover the twisted truth that bound the Hollow Children to the Hollow Woods? The game was only beginning, and the Hollow Children's laughter echoed through the night, promising a nightmare far from over. The Hollow Woods, with its haunting children, waited for the next victim, always hungry for more souls to join the game. David and Sarah sat by the flickering light of a single candle, their nerves frayed as the Hollow Children's laughter echoed outside. The air was thick with an unnatural chill, and they knew the night would only grow worse. Suddenly, the whispers returned, stronger this time. They seemed to come from within the very walls of the house, a chorus of ghostly voices urging them to participate in the game. But one voice stood out, a deep, hoarse whisper, different from the playful tones of the children. Find the cradle. It holds the secret. The cradle? Sarah's mind raced. There had been an old, broken-down barn behind the farmhouse they hadn't bothered to explore. It had seemed insignificant, decayed beyond repair, but now, the voice in the walls urged her to reconsider. We need to go to the barn, Sarah whispered to David. He hesitated, glancing toward the windows where the children's red eyes glowed like embers in the night. Are you sure? He asked. We don't have a choice, Sarah replied, her voice trembling but resolute. There's something they don't want us to find. Gathering what courage they could, the couple hurried to the back door. David grabbed an old rusted shovel, more for comfort than protection, while Sarah clutched the lantern. The wind howled as they stepped outside, the cold biting at their skin. Shadows darted between the trees, the hollow children watching with eerie silence. As they neared the barn, the air grew colder still. The door hung loosely from its hinges, creaking as they pushed it open. Inside, it was as though time had stopped. Broken farming tools lay scattered on the dirt floor, and in the far corner, there it was, a cradle. It was old, the wood blackened with age, but as Sarah approached, she noticed something peculiar. Carved into the wood were strange symbols, runes she didn't recognize but could feel were brimming with dark energy. David raised the lantern, revealing a dusty blanket draped over the cradle. Slowly, Sarah reached out and pulled it back, revealing something that chilled her to her core. Inside the cradle lay an old, withered doll, its porcelain face cracked and worn. But there was something unnerving about it. It felt alive, watching them with cold, lifeless eyes. Around its neck was a small silver pendant with the same runes carved into it. Suddenly, the deep voice from the walls echoed in Sarah's mind again, louder this time. The doll. Destroy it. Break the curse. Sarah hesitated. Was this the answer? Could the doll be the key to freeing the hollow children? Before she could decide, the barn door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang. The air grew thick with an unnatural pressure, and from the shadows emerged the hollow children, their forms more grotesque than ever, twisted limbs, hollow eyes glowing red, their faces frozen in expressions of malevolent glee. You shouldn't be here, one of the children hissed, stepping forward. It was the same girl David had seen in the woods, her smile now warped into a cruel grin. The cradle is ours. The game is ours. David tightened his grip on the shovel, but it was no use. The children closed in, their laughter now dark and echoing with menace. Then, as if in a trance, Sarah grabbed the doll from the cradle. She could feel a pulse, a faint heartbeat from within the porcelain. The air around them grew darker, colder, as if the very essence of the hollow woods was closing in on them. Break it, the deep voice commanded in her mind, louder than ever. Free them, or they will never stop. With trembling hands, Sarah raised the doll above her head, preparing to smash it against the ground. But just before she could, the girl's voice cut through the air again, sharp and desperate. Don't! The girl cried out, her face contorting with fear for the first time. If you break it, you'll release something worse. We're the only thing keeping it locked away. Sarah froze, the weight of the doll in her hands now unbearable. David looked at her, eyes wide with confusion and fear. Sarah, what do we do? David whispered. The hollow children stood still, their hollow eyes watching with a mix of anger and dread. The girl, the leader of the children, stepped closer, her voice now filled with urgency. That doll, it's not just a curse, it's a prison, she whispered, her voice almost pleading. If you break it, something ancient, something darker than us will be unleashed. We were its playthings once. We escaped. But if you break it, it will come for you. Sarah's grip on the doll tightened. Could she trust the children? Or was this another one of their games, another twisted trick to keep them trapped in the hollow woods forever? The air grew heavier with each passing second, the deep voice in Sarah's mind now screaming for her to act. The hollow children closed in, their grotesque forms trembling with a mix of fear and anticipation. She had a choice to make. Destroy the doll and possibly free them from the torment or risk unleashing something far worse than the hollow children. Sarah closed her eyes, her heart racing, as she made her decision. And with that, the hollow woods fell silent, waiting for the outcome of her choice, while the sinister game continued. One way or another, the story had not yet reached its end, for the darkness that dwelled in the woods was far from finished with its twisted game. Sarah's hands trembled as she stood at the precipice of an impossible decision. The voices around her grew louder, the pressure mounting, and the hollow children, those twisted, once innocent souls, watched her every move, fear etched in their grotesque forms. "Don't!" The girl with hollow eyes cried again, her voice a desperate plea. "You don't understand. We were trying to protect you." Sarah's mind was racing. The deep voice in her head was now almost unbearable, an unrelenting command to destroy the doll, to break the curse and end the torment. But there was doubt gnawing at her. What if the girl was telling the truth? What if breaking the doll wouldn't free them, but would release something far worse into the world? David stood beside her, paralyzed with fear, unsure of what to believe. He glanced at Sarah, pleading silently for her to make a choice. But how could she? How could anyone? With a final deep breath, Sarah made her decision. She raised the doll above her head, prepared to shatter it on the ground. The children screamed in unison, their once malevolent faces now filled with terror. "Please," the girl cried, "don't do it. You'll unleash it. You'll bring it back." Sarah's grip tightened. She closed her eyes and let out a cry of desperation as she hurled the doll to the ground with all her strength. The porcelain shattered into countless pieces, each one exploding with a pulse of dark energy that sent a shockwave through the barn. For a moment, there was silence. The hollow children froze in place, their forms still and lifeless as if suspended in time. Sarah held her breath, waiting, hoping that she had made the right choice. But then, the ground beneath them began to shake. A low rumble, like a distant roar, rose from deep within the earth. The air grew thick with an oppressive darkness, and the temperature plummeted. Sarah could feel it, something ancient, something far more terrifying than the children, stirring beneath the surface. The darkness that had been trapped within the doll was now free. David grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the barn door. "We have to go. Now." They ran, stumbling out into the night as the ground continued to quake. Behind them, the barn groaned and splintered, collapsing in on itself as if being swallowed by the very earth. The hollow children, now released from their curse, stood silently by the tree line, their hollow eyes filled with something that looked almost like sorrow. But the worst was yet to come. From the center of the barn's wreckage, a shape began to rise. It was enormous, a mass of shifting shadows and writhing tendrils, its form ever-changing, never settling into anything remotely human. Its presence was suffocating, filling the air with the primal fear that gripped Sarah and David's hearts. The entity that had been imprisoned within the doll let out a low, rumbling growl that echoed through the hollow woods. It had no face, but its presence alone spoke of an ancient, unfathomable hunger. It had been trapped for centuries, perhaps millennia, and now it was free to consume, free to devour, free to wreak havoc on anything and everything that crossed its path. The hollow children began to fade, their forms dissipating like mist in the night. The girl, the leader, lingered for just a moment longer, her gaze locking with Sarah's. There was no malice in her eyes, now only a profound sadness. "You freed us," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the growing storm. "But you've also doomed them all." And with that, she was gone, vanishing into the night along with the rest of the hollow children. The woods fell eerily silent, the only sound the distant roar of the monstrous entity rising from the barn's wreckage. Sarah and David ran, but they knew it was futile. The thing that had been unleashed was far beyond anything they could fight or escape. They could hear it moving behind them, feel its dark presence growing stronger with every passing second. It was hungry for the world it had been kept from for so long. As they reached the edge of the hollow woods, they stopped, panting and trembling. The village lay ahead, peaceful and quiet, its inhabitants blissfully unaware of the horror that was now coming for them. Sarah's heart sank as she realized the magnitude of what she had done. There was no stopping it. The darkness had been freed, and now it would spread, consuming everything in its path, starting with Hallowmore. David turned to her, his eyes wide with fear and desperation. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice trembling. Sarah shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "There's nothing we can do," she whispered. "We've unleashed it. And now." The roar of the entity cut through the night, a deafening sound that echoed across the village. In the distance, the lights of Hallowmore began to flicker, one by one, as the darkness spread. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper, and the world seemed to hold its breath in the face of an unimaginable nightmare. Sarah and David stood at the edge of the woods, knowing that their decision had brought about something far worse than they could have ever imagined. The Hollow children had been freed, but the true horror had only just begun. And as the first tendrils of darkness crept toward the village, Sarah realized with chilling certainty that the game had never truly been about the children. It had always been about the monster they were keeping at bay. And now, the monster was free. The end.